Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to this place of science, knowledge, and hope. And this is also the title. I think the title has been missing in the program. But my title is, How Did We Come Trapped in the Present Crisis? What mindset brought us there? And what are the main goals in order to restore a lost respect for nature? What is our hope? What I had in mind when I wrote this was trying to answer some questions that arouse in my mind. First of all, why is it that we have a culture of exploitation? Why is it that we have arrived at a point where we have a culture that, for many good reasons, could be called insane? What have we lost? And what mindset brought us there? Because that is a part of the solution. That is a part of the hope that we have to build up. An analysis of the mindset that brought us where we are. Also another thing, like the nuclear threat, the climate crisis, the disappearance of species and the loss of biodiversity has so severe consequences that it is almost unbearable. When things are unbearable, we tend to ignore and neglect them at first sight. That's a fundamental instinct of survival. I think any person has the need of some kind of neglection. Denial is sometimes necessary because it allows us to grasp reality in portions that prevents us from despair. Repression of reality is a natural way of reaction in the first part of grasping unbearable facts. But denial can also be more than a survival instinct. It can be a very bad habit, a stupidity, and the cause for inactivity and apathy. For the moment, we experience both versions of denial. The psychologist and director of Center for Green Growth at the Business School in Oslo, Per Stoknes, recently published a report in which he states, referring to opinion polls in 39 different countries dating back from 1989, that the more we know about global warming, the more we tend to deny or reject that knowledge. I'm sure that for some people, denial is really their only alternative to despair. So if there's no hope within sight, it's actually quite understandable that some people choose to ignore the problem of climate changes and the painful loss of species. That is why we must never forget to speak about hope, never forget to give people a way of dealing with these immense threats. If we only communicate a situation that is hopeless, we take away the resistance and the power. I'll cut back to hope in a couple of minutes, but before that, I would like to point out some of those mental roads that led us to this uncivilized way of exploitation, because recognizing these roads as a part of is a part of the solution and a part of the hope. The understanding of and view on nature in the Western culture could best be described as not only stupid, but shameless. You could think of the word of the Chinese statesman Yen Fu, who shortly after World War I said that we have a form of civilization that has lost the ability of shame. So we can ask, have we been so deceived by our skills, our victories in science and technology, that we have forgotten that there was a nature existing long before us, a nature that we deeply depend on? Of course, anyone in this room is aware that there was a nature, but is that the mindset of the culture in which we are living in the Western world? The Danish theologian Løgstrup, who has been adopted to some sense by McIntyre and the sociologist Zygmunt Bauman, said, "We live in an immense and fantastic forgetting about what has been given to us. The important things in life cannot be possessed. They are at our disposal as gifts. This basic and simple observation has been forgotten for a long time. Actually, one could suggest a specific proclamation that expresses this unfortunate view on nature. Because when did all this start? It could be the proclamation made by René Descartes in 1637, that with the insight and knowledge of nature, he said, we would be able to make ourselves masters over and owners of the nature, maîtres et possesseurs de la nature. Descartes would probably never have accepted the level of stupid exploitation that we see today. He couldn't foresee what came. But what came was a combination of the thoughts expressed by Descartes with a dualistic approach in which nature was seen as something at the disposal for man. And from that point, man decided to abolish not only God, but the very phenomenon of nature being sacred and holy, and later the very phenomenon of holiness and sacredness. Man took the divinity away from God and placed rationality at the divine place instead. And from that point, nature was at man's brutal disposal and no longer admired as God's unique creation. This is the case of a part of the Western culture. If we want to confront ourselves with other views, we might go to what is sometimes in the Western culture called the underdeveloped countries. Well, we are the underdeveloped countries in our mindset. They have still a view on nature that could teach us a lot. So losing this sacredness, man has also lost his sense of spirituality. Most modern spirituality is no longer linked to the wisdom of those religions from where it was once grown. It has instead been separated from its context and subject to the rationality that today expresses itself in the shape of an instrumental attitude to spiritual matters. Instrumentality has been a new credo. Some years ago, I think 4 years ago, there was a wonderful book published by Nuccio Ordine, an Italian professor. It's called The Importance of the Useless Knowledge. I am writing a little bit more about that in my paper. But it points out that if you are only looking for knowledge that can be used for something, you miss the curiosity. You miss what Plato and Aristotle write about. Aristotle writes about it in his Metaphysics, the first book, that the first part of knowledge is wondering, taumatsein. I learned my confirmants to say taumatsein because they are taught in school that it is important to have competences, but they're not taught that it is important to have a curiosity that is not going to be used for a specific task. That's a part of our culture. That's a part of things that we have to argue against. So in this way, I think, we have replaced wisdom with knowledge, and even knowledge is being driven away in favor of information. We have never had so many facts as we have today, and we have never been so far away from wisdom. In her eloquent book, Zivilisiert den Kapitalismus, the German intellectual Marion Gräfin Dönhoff quotes the German philosopher Hans Jonas. I'll take it in English, but you will have the German version in the paper. Jonas says, "We are trembling in the nakedness of a nihilism, in which the greatest power is combined with the greatest emptiness, the greatest ability with the smallest knowledge for what?" And he adds, "The question remains whether we, without a restoration of the category of holiness, which was thoroughly demolished through the scientific rationalism, could have an ethical dimension that is able to control the extreme powers we possess today. So how come that we had such a loss in our understanding of wisdom? I think we have to understand the importance of a vivid tradition. At least in the Scandinavian countries, it is a rather neglected aspect. If we lose tradition, we lose the source of civilization. We lose our orientation and meaning given to us through the historical knowledge. People become rootless if they forsake their heritage from the past, said the former keeper of national antiquities in Denmark. He was a highly skilled intellectual, known especially in the Arab world and highly respected. It was a wise thing to say, and therefore it is written on the wall in the City Museum of the Danish town Fredericia, and one shouldn't neglect what's written on the wall. Tradition should not be confused with traditionalism. Traditionalism has to do with nostalgia in the sense of sentimentality for the past, as if you want to become what you once were. Awareness of tradition is the opposite of traditionalism. It's a bit like the difference between love for your country and nationalism. Nationalism is the perverted version of love for your country, as often seen in modern nationalism. For the moment, we experience a dangerous combination of nationalism and nostalgia. It carries the roots of totalitarianism and chaos. So the loss of values, or much better, the loss of a vivid tradition carrying the narratives that teaches us about life, is a loss that will lead us into what the Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl called the existential vacuum and loss of meaning in life. Frankl himself pointed out that loss of tradition was the primary reason for the loss of orientation. Not only the loss of orientation, but also a relativism, and a consequence of that, a nihilism, is an important and very influential part of our modern mindset. I think it's a very important thing to understand. One of the victims of this strange orientation of relativism is nothing but the truth. In the relativistic attitude, truth doesn't really exist. It is what you make it. These tendencies that are to be found as an inseparable part of the postmodern mentality is at the end what makes it possible to have a modern attitude that openly doesn't really care about truth. Such a method has been in charge for many years, also long before Trump. It has been an element in the discipline of political spin for many years. It's all about image, and if you ignore the relation between image and identity, credibility is out. Those in favor of this attitude would probably claim that they just have a realistic attitude and view on politics that is cynical, and that people without this attitude are naive and idealistic do-gooders. But if they read their history, they might learn from Jefferson, who wrote, "A lie always harms another. If not some other particular man, still it harms mankind generally, for it vitiates the source of law itself." I'm not the creator of what I see. I'm directed towards something that exists independently of myself. Otherwise, everything is just a product of my dreams and my longings. Why is this important? It is important. It's important because what I'm aiming at is something that at the end just is a part of human creation if I am a victim of this relativism. Some people would say, well, aren't you missing that the seen depends on the eye that see? True, but the existence of what is seen is not depending on the eye that see. The existence is there. Something is there outside myself, and I'm directed towards it. It goes for the individual, and I think it also goes for the mentality in the society. So, what can we do? We can recognize the words of Einstein that I mentioned the other day. A problem cannot be solved by the thinking that created the problem. In other words, we need to look for new roads. We cannot continue of the roads we have been following so far. We can qualify the talk about hope without ignoring reality. We need to know what we can do. If we just speak about hope in general terms, we leave those who are in despair because of their reluctance to see the reality without hope. Optimism without facing reality will have a short life, and it will cause even deeper despair. We can learn from the past. We can try to abandon some of the insanities of our culture that so unethically have been tolerated as the exploitation of nature. We can learn from the fact that renewal comes from remembering the treasures of the past, ready to be integrated into the shaping of the future. Not just repeating the past. It's a common habit among other Lutherans that they think that if you are to be a good Lutheran, you repeat what Luther said. That's not being a good Lutheran, that's just being a good tape recorder. So, shaping the future with the knowledge of the past, with the conscious and the knowledge of what is going on in my own present. That's the opposite of nostalgia. We must speak up and use the tools given us, especially from this wonderful place that hosts some of the most inspiring meetings where the future can be formed. The world, we shouldn't forget that. The world can be changed if we want it to be changed. We are not slaves of a man-made illusion of necessity that sees growth and the market-ruled economy as the only tools in society. I live in a country where for many years it has been almost a religion that the market is the only alternative to socialism and communism. People are starting to see that greed is not necessarily good. We had a professor at the business school who said recently, greed is good. It has ruled society for decades with a predator capitalism as its result. One of my ideals in politics, one of the leading politicians in the late 20th and the earliest 21st century was Helmut Schmidt. And he talked about Raubtierkapitalismus. The strive for utility has occupied our mentality to a degree where we have almost lost sense of the importance of matters other than money and security. As Fukuyama says in his latest book, what one really needs is a theory of why some people pursue money and security while others choose to die for a cause or to give time and money to help other people. Things are changing for the moment. Young people are demonstrating, and we should remember that a long time ago, but not that long time ago, Monday demonstrations in East Germany was a part of the solution. Today it's Friday demonstrations. Why shouldn't they also have a lot of influence? We in the privileged part of the world must abandon our wealth in order to create support for the countries in whose areas nature of vital importance for this planet is situated. If we want to prevent them from doing what we in many Western countries did in the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, making forests into agricultural landscapes. We must work together with these countries to ensure that they don't have to pay the bill that we have an ethical obligation to share. 10 more seconds. We should not try to make the world a paradise. That's impossible. But we can learn how to take care of the world and to use all our strength to find ways of making the world more human, giving people the possibility to live their lives in dignity, so that we share the richness and the resources in a world given to us in a way that could never be possessed or owned by us. We need to change the mentality of exploitation. One of the most hope-giving publications recently is the encyclical Laudato Si. Even in the Protestant country where I come from, this great publication has been an inspiration also among people who normally would pay absolutely no attention to what any church had to say about anything. Reaching out to people can be done. If we combine reality, hope, and love, and none of these are dispensable, we have a good chance of changing the world, nothing less. Thank you.